Hello, my name is Caroline, and my family tried to erase me without ever saying the words. They called it a misunderstanding, said I didn't need a house because I was single, said Amy, my sister, deserved it more. My mother served cupcakes while handing me legal papers. My brother left bruises on my wrist. My father told me to sign the deed like I was handing over a library book. But what hurts more than betrayal is how calm they were about it. Why did they think I'd stay silent? And what else have they planned behind my back? They just made the worst mistake of their lives. That sentence kept circling my head like a slow-turning ceiling fan as I backed out of my parents' driveway. The porch lights glared behind me, bright, sterile, unforgiving, just like their eyes at the table. I didn't speed away. I didn't slam the door. I drove off like I'd simply finished dinner and needed to run an errand. Except instead of leftovers, I carried a storm inside me. The street lights blinked on as I crossed into my neighborhood. One by one, those warm glows clicked to life, lighting up porches of neighbors I'd waved to for years, never once telling them what it was like to be Caroline Whitlow, the youngest, the expendable, the one everyone assumed would always be fine because I never complained loud enough to register. I pulled into my driveway. My house, small but mine, sat like a quiet witness to the chaos that had just unfolded. The blue paint had faded a little in the Georgia sun. The shutters could use tightening. But the lemon tree I planted 5 years ago was strong, the branches reaching toward the roofline like they knew their place in the world. I didn't feel quite as certain. Inside, I tossed my purse onto the kitchen counter and leaned against the fridge. The cool hum of the appliance was the only sound. No raised voices. No ultimatums. No brothers twisting wrists beneath the table like some mob threat disguised in a Sunday shirt. Just me and my breath coming shallow and fast. I didn't cry. I wanted to. But it felt like that would somehow validate everything they said. That I was too emotional, too sensitive, too difficult to reason with. So instead, I kicked off my shoes, unzipped the back of my dress, and padded barefoot into the living room. There was a framed photo on the mantel. One of the last family portraits we took when I was still included. In that image, I stood off to the side, barely touching shoulders with the rest of them. Even in pixels, I looked like a placeholder. I picked it up, studied it a moment, then flipped it face down. It didn't feel like rebellion, just truth. I needed to do something, anything, to make sense of what just happened. I went to my home office and opened the filing cabinet. Inside, every receipt from every repair, every mortgage payment, every insurance policy, my quiet proof that this house was not gifted, not inherited, not part of some legacy they could strip away. It was earned. It was mine. I pulled out the folder labeled Deed and laid it flat on the desk. My fingers trembled a little, not from fear, but from the adrenaline still rushing through me. I snapped a photo of the first page and sent it to Dorian, my lawyer, with a short message. They made a move. I need to make mine. Less than a minute later, he replied, I'm wide awake. Let's talk first thing. Don't let them get to you. I closed my laptop and sank into the chair. The night outside was silent, the kind of quiet that feels deliberate, like the world was holding its breath for what came next. The doorbell rang. I sat up straight, heart knocking once, hard. I hadn't heard any footsteps on the porch, no car pulling up. I reached for my phone, but before I could open the camera or dial anyone, I heard a voice, Rhett's, loud, uninvited. You think you're gonna run to a lawyer and scare us? Grow up, Caroline. I didn't move, didn't answer. I stayed still in the shadows of my own living room, watching his silhouette pace back and forth across the window. You always were the drama queen, he muttered. That house was never supposed to be yours, you know that? After a few more minutes of stomping and muttering, he left, or at least his voice did. I waited another 5 minutes before stepping outside, barefoot, onto the porch. The night air bit at my skin. I didn't care. I turned toward the lemon tree, now lit softly by the porch light. One of the branches was broken, snapped and hanging from where Rhett had brushed past it in his tantrum. I crouched down and tied it back gently with twine from the drawer near the door. Small, quiet fixes. the kind I'd done my whole life. As I tied the last knot, I whispered, "You're gonna be okay." Maybe I wasn't talking to the tree. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat at the dining table, the same style as the one at my parents' house, but smaller, more worn, more mine. I opened my laptop again and started organizing everything. The deed, the receipts, scanned copies of emails, screenshots of text messages, even the voicemail Rhett left last month when he hinted something was coming. "Just sign what Dad sends, Care. Don't be stupid." Each file, each click, felt like laying bricks in a wall that would finally keep them out. By the time I finished, it was nearly 2 a.m. My phone buzzed. A message from Callista. "Let's not make this ugly. You know what's fair. Amy needs the house more than you. Don't be difficult." I didn't reply. Instead, I pulled open a drawer I hadn't touched in months and took out a yellowing envelope. Grandma Irene's last letter to me. She'd left it tucked inside a gardening book I borrowed and never returned. I opened it slowly, carefully. "You've always grown things, Caroline, even in bad soil. That's your gift. Don't let anyone dig you up just because they're jealous of your roots." I closed the letter and pressed it to my chest. They thought they were just asking me to sign a piece of paper, but what they really wanted was to erase me. I wouldn't let them. They really think I don't have proof. The question barely escaped my lips as I stood in the quiet of my living room, holding the folder like it was something sacred. I hadn't turned on any lights. The soft glow from the porch spilled in just enough to make out the corners of furniture, familiar shadows stretching across the walls. I sank into the chair by the window and let the weight of that night sit with me. Outside, the lemon tree's silhouette danced in the breeze. A few petals from the early blooms had fallen onto the porch rail, some scattered on the steps like tiny yellow footprints. Even with the broken branch, it stood upright, defiant. I hadn't changed out of my dress. The zippers still dug into my ribs, but I was too wired to care. I just sat there, that folder in my lap, staring at the TV that wasn't on. I wasn't sure how long I stayed like that before I finally stood up and walked toward the office. The folder went back into the drawer. But as I closed it, I noticed something wedged between the files. Something I didn't remember putting there. A second envelope. Old, but newer than the others. No label. I opened it slowly and pulled out a copy of a legal document, typed in that stiff, robotic format lawyers love, and my name jumped off the page, except it was crossed out. I froze. It wasn't the deed, it was a draft of a will, dated just last year. It listed the house under family assets, slated for Callista. My name had been typed in as a placeholder, then slashed through in thick black ink. Callista's was circled. They'd planned it. Not just the dinner, not just the pressuring. They'd already decided. All of it. I leaned over the desk, arms bracing my weight. The room spun for a moment, and I took a few deep breaths through my nose, trying to steady myself. The betrayal wasn't new, but seeing it documented like that, cold, professional, signed in the same handwriting that had once helped me with my homework, it hollowed me out in a way I didn't expect. Eventually, I stood upright and walked back into the hallway. My house felt smaller suddenly, like the walls knew what I'd just read and were closing in to echo it back. I needed air. I stepped out onto the porch again. The wind had picked up. It wasn't cold, but it had that spring chill that slips under your sleeves and reminds you you're still alive. I sat down on the top step. From this spot, I could see the street corner where Dad taught me to ride a bike. I could still remember the sound of his voice yelling, "Keep your eyes forward, Care!" like it was yesterday. That same man was now scribbling my name out of family papers like I was never meant to be part of it. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, opened my photos, and scrolled all the way back to a picture I'd taken a few years ago. The last family photo, everyone in coordinated tones, smiles polished, posed in front of the estate. Callista's hair curled to perfection, Rhett's tie slightly askew. Edric and Valora center stage, me off to the side, half-shadowed, like a guest who got too close to the frame. But what caught my eye now was the frame hanging in my parents' hallway. The new one. I had noticed it on my way out that night. Same photo session, different picture. Except in that version, I wasn't off to the side. I wasn't there at all. They had cropped me out, deliberately. I stared at my screen, thumb frozen above the glass. Then I hit delete. No point in holding on to it. It wasn't my family anymore, not the way they wanted me to believe. I went inside, locked the door, and finally changed out of the dress. Slipping into a worn t-shirt and sweatpants felt like shedding an old skin. I washed my face, brushed my teeth with automatic motions, then returned to the living room. I didn't turn on the TV. Instead, I picked up my tablet and opened social media. Big mistake. The first thing I saw was a post from Callista's best friend, some overly filtered photo of wine glasses clinking, captioned, "Some people just can't be happy for others. Blood isn't always thicker." Family drama had blessed. My chest tightened. I didn't even need to read the comments to know what they were implying. Still, I scrolled. One comment said, "You don't need a house if you're all alone, just saying." Another, "Entitlement looks ugly, even with a pretty face." I dropped the tablet on the couch and walked into the kitchen, gripping the counter for balance. It wasn't just a family betrayal anymore. They were turning it into a public performance. A campaign, one I never signed up for. I thought about calling Malik. He'd always been the quieter one, the one who didn't pick sides. Maybe he'd listen. Maybe he'd at least hear me. I typed out a message. "Hey, can we talk? I need to ask you something about the house." Then I stared at it, reread it, deleted it. No one had reached out to me since that dinner, not even a "how are you" from anyone who watched me walk out. I wasn't shocked, just tired. This hadn't started last night. It had started years ago. In the moments they picked Callista to speak first, to get the best seat, the biggest slice, the newest gift. In the way they always said I was strong enough to handle it, so they never had to lift a finger for me. In the way they made me feel like existing outside their chosen circle was a fault I needed to fix. But I wasn't going to fix it anymore. I walked back to the office, opened the drawer where I kept home files, and pulled out a second envelope, one I had labeled but never used. Inside, printed receipts from every plumber I hired, electricians I paid, furniture I assembled, paint I rolled on these walls alone. There were also photos, before and after shots of the kitchen, the yard, the roof, dates, signatures, all of it. I laid them out across the desk, one by one, like pieces of a puzzle. My own quiet archive. Not for them, not for some courtroom. For me. To remind myself that this place, this life, I built it. Alone. I stared at the message on my phone screen for a while after I sent it to Malik. "Meet me. Just you. I need to show you something they never told you." The 3 dots blinked for a moment, then disappeared. Nothing. I wasn't surprised. Malik never responded quickly, especially when it came to anything involving the rest of the family. He'd always been the bridge, the peacekeeper, the middleman who liked to pretend there were no sides, just misunderstandings. But now I was drawing a line, and I needed to know which side he'd fall on. I set the phone down and walked back into the living room. The soft afternoon light slipped in through the blinds, casting lines across the floor. I sat on the couch, pulled my legs up under me, and opened the photo gallery on my phone. Scrolling through old photos used to be comforting. Not anymore. There it was, the photo I remembered from my parents' hallway, the updated family portrait. We had all been wearing soft blues and whites, standing in front of the white oak tree on the back lawn. My hair had been pinned back, and I remembered how long I waited for Valora to stop fidgeting with Callista's necklace and finally look at the camera. When they posted the edited version to social media a week later, I noticed my spot in the photo looked off. Like someone had taken a small scissor to the edges and trimmed me out. But I didn't want to believe it. Now, holding my phone, the proof stared back at me. The image had been cropped tighter. My entire body, gone. I'd been turned into negative space. I could still hear my mother that day, her voice sharp but sweet. "Caroline, could you just take the picture instead? You're better at getting the angle right." I should have seen it coming. They didn't want me in the photo. They wanted me behind the camera, invisible, framing their version of a perfect family. I closed the app and tossed the phone beside me. Something in me stirred. A mix of sadness and something stronger. Not quite rage, more like clarity with teeth. In the hallway closet, tucked behind old quilts and an unopened waffle iron, I kept a storage box labeled, "For later." It was mostly things I couldn't part with, even when I wanted to forget. I pulled it out and brought it to the kitchen table. Near the top was a plastic garment bag. I unzipped it carefully and slipped out a dress I hadn't touched in years, cream lace, delicate buttons down the back, and a faint smell of cedar still clinging to the fabric. My mother had promised it to me on my 25th birthday. "This will be yours one day," she said, smoothing the sleeve with the kind of reverence usually reserved for heirlooms or old love letters. It had been hers, a gift from my grandmother. "You'll wear it when you get engaged," she added with a hopeful smile I never quite trusted. That day never came, because last night, Callista wore it to dinner. Everyone had complimented her. Even Edric murmured, "You look like your mother did when we met." No one mentioned the promise. No one even looked at me when she walked in, the dress hugging her body like it had been made for her. Maybe in their minds, it always had been. I laid the dress across the table and stared at it, not out of longing, not even resentment, just acknowledgement, like seeing an old photograph of yourself and realizing you'd already been replaced in everyone's memory. Somewhere in the middle of those thoughts, I heard a knock at the door. It was soft, not urgent. I wiped my hands on my jeans and opened it. Malik. He didn't say anything right away, just looked at me with that guarded expression he'd perfected over the years, like he was always halfway between staying and walking away. "I got your message," he said finally. I nodded and stepped aside. "Come in." We sat at the kitchen table. The dress lay there between us like a witness. "I didn't know about any of this," he said, eyes fixed on the lace. "About the house, the papers. There's everything." I believed him. Malik was many things, but he wasn't a liar. "They've been planning it for a while," I said. "There's a draft will. My name's crossed out. Callista's circled." He flinched like the words physically struck him. "Why her?" "Because she fits." My voice was flat. "That's what Mom said once. Amy fits." "I try too hard." He looked at me then, really looked. "I remember that Christmas," he murmured. "You gave them that wood-burned plaque with the coordinates of the house. You spent weeks on it. Mom opened it and said, 'What was it?' 'This is sweet, but don't overthink gifts, honey.'" I nodded. "She didn't even hang it up," I added. "It ended up in the linen closet behind the extra hand towels." He rubbed his jaw. "I thought you were overreacting. Back then, I figured she just didn't know how to show appreciation." I leaned back. "It's not about appreciation. It's about erasure. I was never meant to be part of the story." For a long moment, we sat in silence. Then he asked, "What do you want from me, Care?" I took a breath. "I want you to see it. All of it. The receipts, the messages, the changes to the house, the repairs. I want someone in this family to finally look at what I've built and admit it wasn't handed to me." He nodded slowly. "Okay." I stood, walked to the office, and brought back the folder I'd assembled the night before. He flipped through it without speaking. Each page turned like a ticking clock. With every new bill, every photo, his brows lowered, his shoulders tensed. When he finally looked up, his eyes were glassy. "You kept everything," he whispered. I shrugged. "Someone had to." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You know they'll never admit it. Even if you show them all this, they'll twist it. Say you're making it dramatic." "I know." "They'll say you're being selfish, that you're breaking the family apart." I met his gaze. "They already broke it. I'm just not pretending anymore." He let out a long breath, then stood. "I'll be there," he said. "If this goes further, whatever you need, I'm in." I didn't thank him, not because I wasn't grateful, but because I wasn't sure I could afford to believe in it yet. After he left, I sat back down at the table. The dress still lay there, untouched. I folded it carefully, placed it back in the garment bag, and zipped it closed. Then I walked to the back of the house and tucked it deep into the hall closet, behind the quilts and the waffle iron. Let Callista wear it. Let them have their photos and their posts and their illusions. I had something they didn't. Proof. I didn't sleep much after texting my parents. Maybe 2 hours, at best. The rest of the night, I spent staring at the ceiling or pacing between rooms, mentally rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd say it, and bracing for how they'd spin it. By morning, I'd put on jeans, a navy cardigan, and enough concealer to hide how little rest I'd gotten. Then I packed the folder, deed copies, repair receipts, timelines, even the scanned photo of the cropped-out family portrait, into a simple leather bag. I added 2 flash drives, one for Dorian, the other for insurance. Malik agreed to meet at a small cafe near the county line. We picked it because it was far enough from town that we wouldn't run into anyone we knew, and quiet enough to talk without interruption. A place where you could sip black coffee and pretend for a moment that the world was quieter than it really was. I spotted him the moment I walked in. Same olive jacket he always wore when he wasn't sure which side of a conversation he'd fall on. His coffee sat untouched. He looked up, stood halfway, then sat back down. "Hey," he said. Simple, hesitant. I slid into the seat across from him and pulled the bag into my lap. "You got here early." "Didn't sleep either," he said. Then, "You sure you want to go through with this?" I met his eyes. "I've never been more sure of anything." He nodded once and let out a long breath. "I knew something felt off the other night. I just didn't expect it to be this calculated." I placed the folder on the table and opened it between us. He flipped through each page slowly, carefully. His face didn't move much, but his jaw tightened by the time he reached the property taxes from 3 years ago. "I thought they helped you with this place," he muttered. "They didn't. Not 1 cent. Everything, down to the garden mulch, I paid for out of my own pocket." He didn't question it. He just kept reading. Then he pulled out his phone. "There's something I need to show you," he said, unlocking it and tapping a few buttons. "Amy's been trying to get a business loan. She asked me to co-sign last month, but I said no." I tilted my head. "Why?" He gave a small, grim chuckle. "Because she's bad with money. You know that. And because the loan officer was weirdly specific about the collateral." He handed me his phone. I read the message on the screen. "We've reviewed the documents from Ms. Callista Whitlow regarding the family property at 14 Starling Avenue, listed as her primary residence via intra-family transfer. Pending verification, we can proceed." My fingers curled around the edges of the phone. "They already used the house as collateral?" I said, trying to stay calm. "Or tried to," he replied. "She must have submitted something unofficial. She's not even living there." He nodded. "Exactly." I sat back in the chair, trying to breathe evenly. "They're not just trying to take it. They've already promised it away." Malik rubbed his forehead. "They act like it's a vacation home they can pass around." "It's my life," I whispered, "not a pawn for their next project." We finished our coffee in silence. On my way out, I hugged him, a quick, firm gesture, and said, "Thank you for coming." "I'm still figuring out where I stand," he replied, "but I'm here." That was enough. For now. I got back home around 3 p.m. The sky had clouded over, and a low breeze stirred the air. The lemon tree out front was in full bloom now. White blossoms covered the branches like snow. I stood under it for a minute, letting the scent calm me, before heading inside. I was halfway through organizing files when I got an email alert. Unknown sender. Subject: "Thought you might want this." Attached, a .wav file, and 1 line of text. "Check the date, spring 2017. I was out on the porch that day and recorded everything. Never deleted it." It was from Mrs. Blanchard, our neighbor for the past 40 years. She had 1 hearing aid, 6 bird feeders, and an uncanny ability to know everything without ever leaving her porch swing. I clicked play. The recording was faint, but clear enough to make out the voices. Valora: "She's single. She doesn't need a house." Edric: "It's too much space for 1 person anyway. Let Callista have it. She can flip it for her startup." Valora again: "Caroline will understand. She's always been the practical one." I paused the file. My stomach clenched like I'd been hit. They'd talked about it 6 years ago, back when I was repainting the kitchen cabinets by hand, trying to save money. counting every receipt, and they were already planning to strip it from me. I pressed play again, this time until the end. There was laughter, brief, casual, like my life had been just another dinner table anecdote, something to snicker over with a glass of wine and call strategic family planning. I played the file twice more. The third time, I sat motionless, letting it wash over me, not a single mention of my work, my sweat, my sacrifices. Just a decision made behind closed doors while I was outside with a paintbrush and blind loyalty. I copied the file onto 2 flash drives. One went into the folder, the other into my purse. As the sun dipped low behind the tree line, I lit a single candle on the porch and sat there with my laptop open, staring at the list of names in my contact list. I didn't feel rage anymore, not the shaking kind. It was quieter now, colder, more focused. They think they've planned everything, I whispered aloud, but they forgot who's been paying attention. The candle flickered. I closed the laptop, reached for my phone, and typed the message without hesitation. Tomorrow I'll be by with someone. Please be home. I have something you'll want to hear. I hit send. Then I went back inside, made a cup of tea, and stood by the window, watching the lemon tree sway in the wind. The sun hadn't fully crested the tree line when I pulled into the driveway. The air was still damp from last night's rain, and the wheels of Dorian's car crackled over the gravel like bones underfoot. I didn't feel nervous, not in the usual sense. It was something colder, steadier, not dread, preparation. Dorian stepped out first, adjusting the collar of his charcoal blazer. He always looked composed, like nothing ever ruffled him, even when the people across the table were the ones who'd taught me how to lie with a smile. He held the passenger door open for me. I took a deep breath and stepped out. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded once. They invited this. As we approached the front door, I caught a glimpse through the side window. The table had been reset, white linen runner, gold-rimmed plates, a teapot steaming gently in the center like nothing had ever happened. You'd think we were here for a brunch, not a reckoning. Valora opened the door, a practiced smile already in place. "Caroline, Dorian, come in, come in. We've made some chamomile. You always liked that, didn't you?" I stepped past her without answering. Dorian offered a curt, "Thank you," as he followed. The room smelled like cinnamon and surface-level apology. Callista sat at the far end of the table, dressed in soft pastels, her makeup just dewy enough to read as innocent. Edric stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, face unreadable. "Have a seat," Valora said, gesturing to the same spot I'd occupied the night of the ambush. I chose a different chair. Dorian pulled out a notebook and clicked his pen. "Let's begin." But no one jumped into the topic. Instead, we tiptoed through false pleasantries. How was work? How was the dog? Wasn't the weather oddly warm for spring? I kept my gaze fixed on a hairline crack in the wall near the grandfather clock. It ran like a scar beneath the paint. Valora poured tea and slid a small plate toward me. On it was a single cupcake, vanilla, white icing, a pink sugar flower on top. The same kind they'd forgotten to bring to my birthday 3 years ago. "Thought it'd be nice," she said with that smile, "to start fresh." I didn't touch it. She went on. "We've all had time to reflect. Sometimes families hit rough patches, but what matters is how we move forward, together." Dorian remained silent, letting the moment hang. Edric finally spoke. "No one wants this to get out of hand, Caroline. We're all adults here." "Then let's act like it," I said. They exchanged glances. That's when Callista chimed in, her voice soft and deliberately cautious. "We just want peace. Honestly, I don't even care about the house anymore. It's not about that." My eyes narrowed. "Is that so?" She nodded, all gentle grace. "It was just a misunderstanding. We thought you might be open to options. Shared use, renovation plans, events." I stood slowly and walked to the kitchen counter. Sitting there, neatly aligned with the edge, was a stack of flyers. Callista's New Start, Welcome Home Celebration. There it was, in bold lettering, the address of my home. My name wasn't mentioned anywhere. "You printed these before you spoke to me," I said, turning to face them. "You organized a whole event to welcome her into a house that isn't hers." No one answered. The silence wasn't denial. It was worse. It was calculation caught in the light. I let the paper fall to the floor. Valora tried to salvage it. It was just an idea. Nothing's been finalized. You had a caterer listed on the back, I snapped. You don't book hors d'oeuvres for an idea. Dorian finally spoke, voice even. My client has made her position clear. Any attempt to transfer, occupy, list, or repurpose the property in question will be considered a violation. Edric exhaled slowly through his nose. You're going to drag this family through court over a house? I laughed, short, bitter. You think this is about a house? I turned to Callista. You walked into my home wearing a dress Mom promised to me, sat at my table, smiled like a queen on a throne you didn't build, and none of you thought to ask permission. You assumed, like always. You're overreacting, she said, standing now. You're blowing everything out of proportion. You've always had this complex about being left out. I stepped forward until we were nearly eye to eye. No, I said. I had a complex about thinking I mattered, that if I just worked harder, kept quiet, gave you room, someone would finally notice. Turns out, silence only makes it easier to erase someone. Valora's tone shifted, lower, less rehearsed. Honey, you're making this ugly. I met her gaze. No. You made this ugly. I'm just finally calling it by its name. Dorian reached into his briefcase and retrieved a sealed envelope. He placed it on the table with calm finality. In here is a cease and desist. The next one will be a lawsuit. Callista's face paled. Edric's nostrils flared. Valora reached for the envelope, hands trembling slightly. We're not going to be bullied in our own home, Edric said. Neither am I replied, already walking toward the door. I stopped just long enough to glance back. You think I'm bluffing? Try me. I stared at the message from Valora for a full minute before responding. You always were ungrateful, but dragging us to court. You'll regret this. Not, we're sorry. Not, let's talk. Just a veiled threat disguised as maternal disappointment. I typed a reply, deleted it, typed again, stared at the blinking cursor, then finally sent. I used to be afraid of that. I'm not anymore. I left the phone on the table and let the silence hang. There was no comfort in it, only space. Space to think, to breathe, to plan. My tea had gone cold, but I drank it anyway. It felt grounding. By mid-morning, I got a call from Malik. I went through the rest of the documents you sent, he said. Caroline, they lied to all of us, not just you. I waited. They told me the house had already been transferred. They made it sound like it was a done deal. But it's not, I replied. I never signed anything. The deed is still in my name. He was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. If you need me to testify, I will. The words sat heavily between us. I had hoped for his support, sure, but hearing it was different, like a knot I'd been carrying for years had finally loosened a little. Thank you, I said. I might take you up on that. After the call ended, I stood at the kitchen counter, watching the morning sun cut through the blinds, casting neat lines across the floor. The house felt steadier than it had in days. I could almost hear the old floors exhale. At noon, Dorian called. We filed the injunction. The judge signed it. Nothing gets moved, transferred, or sold without your approval. They've been served? I asked. An hour ago, Callista posted something about it already. Of course she had. I opened my social media, and sure enough, there it was. A photo of her on the porch of my house. My porch. Captioned, "It's a shame when family chooses lawyers over love. Some people just don't know what grace looks like anymore." The comment section was a train wreck. "That's your house now, girl." "You deserve it." "She's always been jealous. Let her sue. She'll lose." "Some sisters can't stand to see others shine." I scrolled for a moment, then shut the app. The rage bubbling in my stomach was sharp but focused. I forwarded the post to Dorian. He texted back. Noted. Screenshotted. Useful pattern of behavior. By late afternoon, my mailbox clanked shut with a heavy thud. Legal papers, thick, stapled, and smug. A formal countersuit, emotional distress, property misrepresentation, defamation. I sat down at the dining table, the envelope still sealed. I stared at it for a few seconds, then slid it open with a paring knife from the kitchen. Callista's name was on the front page. So was Edric's, Valora's. I picked up the phone and called Malik again. "They're suing me now," I said, keeping my voice calm. "What?" "For defamation and emotional damage. Apparently, I'm tearing the family apart." I heard him exhale. "You need to hit back," he said. "Not just in court, publicly. They're trying to build a story before you can even speak." I paused. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means they're betting you'll stay quiet, like always. You have everything, proof, records, audio, use it." I hung up and walked into my office. The folder was there, waiting. I sat down and opened it. Page by page, I pulled out what I needed. Scanned copies of the deed, payment records, emails confirming renovation work, printed screenshots of Callista's post, and a transcript of Rhett's voicemail from last week. "You think this is over? Dad's got something that'll bury you. Just wait." I emailed the voicemail to Dorian. He responded immediately. "That's not just a threat, that's admissible." I added that to the file. Then I took the entire folder, every carefully curated piece of evidence, and carried it to my car. I drove across town to the vet clinic where I worked, walked through the back door, and found Dorian waiting in the break room with a cup of gas station coffee. He looked up when I walked in. "This everything?" he asked, gesturing toward the folder. "It's what I've got," I said, handing it to him. "Let's make this official." He opened it and started scanning through the contents. A small smile tugged at one corner of his mouth. "This is more than enough," he said. "They should have remembered you were always the most thorough." I didn't smile back. Instead, I sat down and looked out the window. The lemon tree outside the clinic was smaller than mine, but just as stubborn. Its blossoms were just beginning to open. When I got home that evening, the sun was slipping down behind the rooftops. I changed into pajamas, microwaved leftovers, and ate standing at the counter. My phone buzzed just as I was rinsing the dish. A message from Valora. "You always were ungrateful, but dragging us to court? You'll regret this." Not surprised, not even fazed. I dried my hands on a dish towel, picked up the phone, and typed my response. Then deleted it. Then typed again. I used to be afraid of that. I'm not anymore. I hit send. Then I turned off the lights, walked out to the porch, and sat beneath the lemon tree until the stars came out. Valora's message still sat in my phone, a threat barely veiled beneath maternal shame. I let it stay there like a thorn under the skin, not because I needed the reminder, but because I wanted them to know they didn't scare me anymore. The next day arrived gray and thick with humidity. Savannah's air always had a weight to it before a storm, and that morning felt no different. My blouse clung to my back before I even stepped into the family house. I wore black slacks, flats, hair pulled back into a low bun. Neutral armor. Dorian was already parked outside when I arrived. He stepped out, briefcase in hand, and gave me a short nod. No words, just readiness. Malik pulled in minutes later, his expression tight but resolved. He'd shaved, which I took as a sign he meant business. Together, we walked toward the front door of the house I used to pretend felt like home. Valora opened it with that performative poise she reserved for church fundraisers and HOA meetings. Her pearls were on, of course, and her smile was as crisp as her ironed linen dress. "Caroline, gentlemen, please come in." The air inside was cooler, but not more comfortable. The dining room had been rearranged, table extended, chairs aligned like it was a corporate negotiation. Edric sat at the head, fingers laced in front of him like a man preparing to deliver a verdict. Rhett leaned against the fireplace, arms folded, smirk plastered on his face like he'd been waiting to pounce. Callista sat prettily in a blush dress, eyes big and blank, the picture of wounded innocence. We didn't sit right away. Dorian placed his briefcase on the floor beside him, staying standing. Edric cleared his throat. "Let's not draw this out. This ends today. You'll sign, and we'll all move on." I looked him dead in the eye. "Is that a command or a suggestion?" He didn't answer. I reached into my bag, pulled out the flash drive, and handed it to Dorian. He connected it to his laptop, opened the file, and pressed play. The room filled with the tinny, unmistakable voices of Edric and Valora from 6 years ago, recorded by our neighbor, Mrs. Blanchard, who had a habit of leaving her phone recording on her porch swing. Valora: she's single. She doesn't need a house. Edric: too much space for one person. Let Callista have it. Valora again: Caroline will understand. She's always been the practical one. Silence followed. Even Callista stopped blinking. Rhett was the first to speak. That's illegal. You can't record someone without consent. Dorian stayed calm. Actually, in Georgia, only one party needs to consent to a recording. And that party was the recorder. Edric's jaw twitched. Callista glanced at Valora, her lips parting as if to say something, but nothing came out. I looked at each of them in turn. You planned this for years, behind my back. You used my status, my independence, as an excuse to take what I built. You never even asked. We were looking out for what made sense, Edric said, voice low. What made sense for whom? I shot back. Callista? So she could throw another launch party for a business that'll fold in 6 months? That's enough, Rhett snapped, stepping toward me. Dorian stepped between us before I even moved. I'd recommend you sit back down, Mr. Whitlow. Rhett hesitated. His smirk slipped. I didn't flinch. You already tried once, Rhett. Go ahead. Try again. I dare you. Valora's hand shot out. Please, she said sharply. Let's not turn this into a spectacle. Too late. I walked to the table, pulled out the legal documents I'd signed that morning, and placed them right in the center. This, I said clearly, is a petition to transfer full legal protection of residence to my name, including media protections against defamation and unauthorized listing, effective immediately. Dorian added, any further attempt to claim, occupy, or transfer rights to the property without express consent from my client will result in immediate legal action. All communication will go through counsel. From this moment forward, this house is hers, fully. Valora's face turned a shade I'd never seen. Callista looked like she'd swallowed her own tongue. Rhett sat down, finally. Edric stood, slow and deliberate. You'll ruin this family over a house? I kept my voice level. You did that when you decided I didn't belong in it. He didn't respond. Malik, who had stayed quiet the entire time, finally spoke. I read everything. She's telling the truth, all of it. And if this goes to court, I'll testify to that. Valora turned to him, betrayed. You're taking her side? No, he said. I'm taking the side that's right. The room cracked. Years of quiet pain, buried insults, silent holidays, it all shifted in that moment. Valora's hand trembled as she reached across the table. Please, don't make this public. I leaned forward, calm and measured. That depends on your next move. Her eyes didn't leave mine, but she knew. We both did. There was no coming back. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. My body was still, but my mind moved restlessly through every corner of memory, moments, details, things I wished I'd said. The house was quiet, the lemon tree outside just visible through the window, its branches heavy with blooms, the blossoms ghostly under the moonlight. By 5 a.m., I was up, showered, dressed in a navy suit that didn't demand attention but made a statement nonetheless. I tied my hair back into a low bun, kept my makeup minimal, and wore flats that wouldn't echo too loudly on the marble floor of the courthouse. By 6, Dorian arrived. He didn't have to knock. I was waiting on the porch with the folder in my hand. He gave me a nod, and we rode in silence all the way downtown. No music, no small talk, just the hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional soft squeak of his leather briefcase shifting in the back seat. The courthouse was already waking up when we pulled into the lot. A security guard yawned near the entrance, coffee in hand. The morning air was warm, but carried that unmistakable pre-storm pressure, the kind that told you something was going to break, weather or otherwise. Inside the courtroom, the Whitlow family had taken their seats already. Edric looked like he belonged at the head of a boardroom, posture rigid, hands clasped. Valora sat beside him, Her lips pressed into a line, her eyes flicking toward me, then away, like I was something indecent she wished she hadn't seen. Callista, dressed in soft pink, clutched her designer purse like it was a talisman. Rhett leaned back in his chair with the same arrogant posture he wore at every family dinner, jaw set, like he was the one on trial. I sat at our table, hands folded, my breathing slow and deliberate. Dorian laid out the documents in quiet, methodical order: deed, receipts, emails, screenshots, the transcript of Rhett's threatening voicemail, and the printed social posts from Callista. Lastly, he set down the folded letter in my grandmother's handwriting. Judge Corwin entered the room and took his seat with an air of practiced weariness. This wasn't the first family civil case he'd presided over, and I was certain it wouldn't be the last. He scanned the room over his reading glasses, then looked at Dorian. "You may begin." Dorian stood and began presenting the facts, not dramatized, not editorialized, just facts: my purchase of the house, my complete financial ownership, the false narratives spun online, the threatening behavior. The long-term gaslighting campaign hidden beneath the veneer of Sunday dinners and family reunions. Then he picked up the letter. "This," he said, "is a handwritten note from Irene Whitlow, the defendant's grandmother, dated 2 years prior to her passing. We present this not as legal documentation of transfer, but as context." He read aloud. "This house is hers. She earned it. Not because we gave it to her, but because she gave herself to it. Every board, every nail, every plant out back, she didn't inherit this place, she built it. Tell the others if they ask, she's the one who stayed when no one else would." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Rhett looked rattled. Callista's face had gone a few shades paler. Valora closed her eyes. Edric remained still, but I saw the way his knuckles whitened around the edge of the table. Judge Corwin asked one question, just one. To the plaintiff, "Is there any written document legally filed that disputes Mrs. Whitlow's sole ownership of the property?" There was none, because it didn't exist. He looked over the rim of his glasses, voice even. "The court finds no legal or ethical grounds for any challenge. The property is rightfully and solely owned by Miss Caroline Whitlow. Any further harassment, misrepresentation, or attempts at interference will be subject to legal penalty." The gavel struck once. Murmurs rippled behind me. It was over. I exhaled for the first time in days. Not out of celebration, just release. Like something long lodged in my throat had finally dislodged. Outside the courthouse, reporters had started to gather, local bloggers mostly, and a crew from the small-town paper. One of them tried to shout a question, but Dorian stepped in front of me. "We're not taking questions at this time." By the time I reached the sidewalk, my phone buzzed. A push notification from the local blog. "Daughter wins legal battle against family's secret plot." Below it, a grainy photo of me walking out of the courtroom, folder in hand. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just walked to the car, heels tapping on marble, each step measured, grounded. Inside the vehicle, I sat with my back against the seat, staring out the window as buildings slid past. Dorian didn't speak until we pulled up to my house. "You did the right thing," he said. "I did the necessary thing," I replied. He nodded once. "That's often the same." Back inside my house, I kicked off my shoes, let my bag fall to the floor, and stood in front of the window facing the yard. The lemon tree swayed gently in the wind, its blossoms fully open now, like they'd been holding their breath too. The house was mine, not because a judge said so, but because I never gave it up. Later that evening, I drove past the courthouse again, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see it in a different light. I parked across the street, stepped out, and walked up the front steps. The stone columns stood tall and worn. I reached out and touched one. "You did it," I thought. The wind picked up slightly, and I closed my eyes, letting it wash over me. Not cleansing, just real. I wasn't healed, not yet, but I wasn't afraid either. Driving home, headlights from passing cars streaked across my windshield. At a red light, I looked over and saw a father and daughter in the car next to me, her head on his shoulder, eyes closed. I didn't envy them. I just noted it, like a page in a book I used to read. When I got home, the porch light flickered once, then stayed on. I stepped out, heels crunching against the gravel. I stood still for a long time. Now comes the harder part, I whispered to myself, eyes on the door, the windows, the space that belonged to me again. Remembering who I was before all this. Now comes the harder part. Remembering who I was before all this. It's strange how quiet things become once the noise stops. The kind of quiet that doesn't just fill a room but creeps into your bones. The house was mine now, uncontested, sealed by law and by truth. But it didn't feel victorious. It just felt still, like the aftermath of a storm where the wreckage isn't dramatic, just deeply personal. I went back to work the next morning. The vet clinic felt the same, smelling faintly of antiseptic and wet fur. But the way people looked at me had changed, not in a bad way, just different, more knowing. A few clients who'd seen the article in the local blog whispered comments as they checked in their pets. "Good for you," one woman said under her breath, sliding her cat carrier across the counter. "You didn't let them walk all over you," said another man who rarely spoke more than a grunt when paying. I nodded politely, thanked them, but didn't linger in the conversation. I didn't need praise. I needed normal. Still, I won't pretend those words didn't settle somewhere deep, like water finding a crack and filling it. By the end of the week, the ripple effects had begun. Rhett was put on administrative leave from the real estate office, something about conduct violations and pending review. He called Malik, apparently furious, but Malik told him he was lucky I hadn't pressed charges for the wrist incident. That call ended abruptly, I was told. Edric quietly withdrew from 2 community boards. No official statement, just absence. Valora stepped down from her church planning committee. Some murmured she was ill, others claimed she was traveling. The truth was simpler, she didn't want to answer questions. People had started to ask why her daughter hadn't attended Easter brunch, why her son looked like someone who'd been caught in a lie. Callista. She deleted her blog. The whole thing vanished overnight. Her curated posts of brunches and self-love quotes, gone. Someone forwarded me a column from the town newsletter. Not all family stories are fit for filters. They didn't mention names, but everyone knew. It didn't give me satisfaction, but it did offer something quieter, space. A few days later, I found a small box on my porch. No return address, no note, just a simple package tied with a faded blue ribbon. Inside was my grandmother's locket, the one she wore every Sunday, the one I asked about as a girl, and she always said, "This will find its way to you when it's time." It had. There was no card, but I didn't need one to know where it came from. Valora. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a plea for reconciliation. It was acknowledgement. I stood at the kitchen counter holding the locket, letting the chain dangle between my fingers. I didn't cry, but something shifted, not in grief, in gravity. I walked to the porch that afternoon, sat in the rocking chair, and pulled up the audio recording one last time. I listened, not to fuel the anger, but to honor the journey. The voices of Edric and Valora felt distant now, small. When it ended, I deleted the file, not to forget, but to move forward. The letter from Grandma Irene, I framed it, hung it in the hallway by the front door. Every time I leave the house, I pass the words, "She didn't inherit this place, she built it." One evening, I drove across town to attend a support group. Someone had mentioned it casually in conversation, an informal circle for estranged adult children held at a small community center behind the library. I sat in a folding chair, styrofoam cup of coffee in my hands, surrounded by strangers who all wore the same quiet fatigue I'd felt for months. When it was my turn, I hesitated. My throat was dry. I wasn't sure how to start. "My name is Caroline," I said. "And for most of my life, I thought I just needed to try harder to be loved. I thought if I stayed small enough, helpful enough, quiet enough, one day they'd let me in." I paused. They didn't break me, they just reminded me who I am. No applause, just nods, silent understanding, and that was enough. Days passed, life resumed. I went to work, cooked simple dinners, planted new herbs by the kitchen window. The lemon tree bloomed like it hadn't noticed anything happened. One Sunday, I walked past the church downtown. I hadn't been inside since Grandma's funeral, but I didn't avoid it either, just kept walking. On the bulletin board by the steps, someone had posted a flyer. Spring rebuilding event, volunteers needed. I read it, smiled faintly. I didn't take a flyer, I didn't sign up, but I kept walking, my pace steady, my steps certain. I didn't need them to see me anymore. I just needed to see myself. What would you do if your own family tried to erase you from your own life? Sometimes, the deepest betrayals come not from strangers, but from those sitting across the dinner table. This story reminds us that silence doesn't equal peace, and standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. Have you ever been made to feel like the outsider in your own family? Let us know your story in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that hit close to home.